Information Risk with David Loshin, powered by Insight Jam.
Hey, it's Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to another Information Risk podcast episode with our Solutions Review expert, David Loshin. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me yet again. I'm just so excited about our growing listenership or viewership of our podcast. It seems to be doubling every couple of weeks, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, I think this topic is great. So we're exploring information risk. We're drilling down into all kinds of interesting case studies. David, of course, is the primary analyst at Knowledge Integrity, and is really bringing a wealth of expertise from not only outside from all of his consulting gigs, but he's also repping Maryland, the University of Maryland today, which is very nice to see.
I just want to thank all of my students, especially all of the ones that are graduating. We did a bunch of interesting projects in our capstone class this semester. They all did a great job, and I think this is going to be released during graduation week. So I just wanted to tip my hat.
Oh, look! You're totally loaded with the Terrapin kit.
Yeah, exactly.
Outstanding. So today we're getting into some really interesting case studies around AI and bad data, and I think the first one is fascinating. I don't know if this is what you would call an artificial intelligence hallucination. But we can certainly find out a little bit more about the example and then dig in on what we think was going on and what the implications are. So, can you just tee up that first example of kind of an AI failure, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, when the I'm going to say the interest, I was going to say hysteria, but I'll ratchet it back to interest in the use of these open source accessible or openly accessible generative AI tools like ChatGPT started kind of gaining momentum. You started seeing, certain kinds of use cases where people would be going to ChatGPT, asking questions through their different types of prompts to get some results and then be able to use that results. And I will admit, I tested it out myself. I used it, and I used it in an interesting use case. One of the organizations I'm working with was looking to hire a particular type of role. And what I did is I went to ChatGPT and I said, "Can you give me a job description for this type of role?" And I went through a couple of iterations and we came up with actually a pretty good description. And so I did it again for a different organization and went through that as well. And they actually hired somebody using that job description. So, it was good. It's a good tool to use. It's an interesting tool. And the way that the tool works is it is trained on massive amounts of data. And the reason it's called generative AI, and I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows this, but just to remind myself, it's called generative AI because it is making use of patterns that it recognizes in the huge corpus of content that it was used to train with, and it does prediction of what the next words would be in a stream in an answer to the type of prompt. And so a generally available generative AI system is trained using content that was collected from across all the different potential sources. But it's not a person. It's a machine. It's a mechanical device.
But
maybe it's not.
It's an incredible. When you first use it, it's mind-boggling because it is remarkably
responsive and articulate in its answers.
Articulate. That's a good way to say it. It's incredibly articulate, and it presents things in such a way that you can't help but be impressed at the generative element of it when it produces written words instantaneously to a prompt. It's a remarkable amount of technology, and I think where we're headed in this conversation is that by being so initially impressed and it being so apparently complete in its presentation of the information and authoritative, that it's hard not to just believe that it got it 100% right.
That's exactly the problem, right? It's that it's so convincing that if you're not aware of what the potential variances might be in the answers that come out, you're just prone to start believing that you're talking to a person.
And very knowledgeable person, more knowledgeable than you could possibly be about any topic.
Right. And so you assume that what comes out is believable. And yet here's this example, which is in mid 2023, there's a lawyer that ends up using ChatGPT to do research for cases that support a lawsuit that was associated with an individual who had gotten injured. So a little bit about the case here. The case involved a man. I'm reading this from a couple of articles, and I've got, again, as always, we're going to have the links in the description. Case involved a man named Roberto Mata, who had sued the airline Avianca, claiming he was injured when a metal-serving cart struck his knee during an August 2019 flight from El Salvador to New York. And so the company, Avianca, asked the judge to dismiss the lawsuit because the statute of limitations had expired. And then the lawyers responded. So Mr. Mata, the plaintiff, the lawyers responded with a 10-page brief citing more than half a dozen court decisions with names like Martinez versus Delta Airlines, Zickerman versus Korean Airlines, and Varghese versus China Southern Airlines in support of their argument that the suit should be allowed to proceed. After Avianca's lawyers could not locate the cases, the judge ordered Mr. Mata's lawyers to provide copies. They submitted a compendium of decisions. It turned out the cases were not real. So here's what happened. The lawyer went to ChatGPT and said, can you give me examples of cases that are similar to this one? And of course, what it did is it predicted a bunch of cases that were similar to that one, but it didn't respond with, here's a link to descriptions of these real cases. It just made them up. So is that what an hallucination is? Yeah, I guess that is.
Well, it as the New York Times so eloquently put it, it discerned the labyrinth framework of written legal argument, but it had populated it with names and facts from a bouillabaisse of existing cases. So it was picking things out of, other cases that were tangential in its mind, right? And creating, it was almost like a reckless law student behavior.
Yeah.
At the last minute, trying to cram.
Interesting choice of words in this article from the New York Times. A legal commentator says, this case has reverberated throughout the entire legal profession. It is a little bit like looking at a car wreck. So, reckless usage of this tool and then turning it into a car wreck. I mean, the thing here is that, and again, I'm reading from the article, for nearly 2 hours, the lawyer was grilled by a judge in a hearing ordered after the disclosure that the lawyer had created a legal brief, and that was filled with fake judicial opinions, all generated by ChatGPT. This judge said he would now consider whether to impose sanctions on the lawyer and his partner. At times during the hearings, the lawyer squeezed his eyes shut and rubbed his forehead with his left hand. He stammered and his voice dropped. He repeatedly tried to explain why he did not conduct further research into the cases that ChatGPT had provided to him. Quote, God, I wish I did that and I didn't do it, he said, adding that he felt embarrassed, humiliated, and deeply remorseful. So yes, you're remorseful and all that. But look, after I did my experiments with looking for job descriptions, which I think the tool did a really good job, I am obsessed with the ego surfing. So I asked ChatGPT to tell me everything it knew about David Loshin, and it conjured up a whole bunch of things about 1/3 of it was correct, and the remainder was literally made up. It said, it produced some kind of description of what my job was at some mythical, non-existent company. It gave me fake credentials, and so it can learn. And look, I'm all over the internet, so it's not like there's not information about me that can be used to do this training, but it's a little bit interesting about the whole explainability component of this, which is it. There's no way to know why it produced the data that it did or the response that it did, because these models are designed that way. They're essentially like really, really super, super sophisticated neural networks.
Well, I look at this. I look at this as skating on thin ice, right? So this is the first go of the winter on the pond. The ice is only going to get thicker.
Yeah.
This is where, trusting it in its infancy like this is you're taking your career into your own hands to a certain degree. However, I will say that, we're at ChatGPT 3.5, which, we didn't even see 1.0, but by the time it's at 5, 6, 7, it's going to be a whole different animal. And
we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Because the believability of the response is literally, it's always going to be based on how the model was built. And there's two aspects to how the model was built. So I'm giving you a preview of what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But there's literally two aspects. There is the algorithms that are used and the whole mechanisms by which it does all the sausage machinery to produce the output model. But it's all based on the data that goes into it and is used for training and is used for fine tuning. And so, as a preview of our conclusion, if you have data that is not really well understood or is flawed or is missing information, then you have to take the consequences of what happens when you rely on a model that was generated using that data as training information.
Right. So just to put a finer point on this particular case, and we'll move on to example number 2, but the mistake here was just trusting this infant technology in a incredibly consequential legal environment, right? It was just reckless on every level.
Yes, although I let's take a step back. This is not like a massive tort class action suit with billions of dollars at stake. This is a I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the exact details of what you call these things, but this is a guy who got hit with a serving cart and who was suing an airline, probably not for more than 5 figures.
I know.
Maybe
I'm
more. I have no
suggesting
idea,
the consequences are that you ended up in the New York Times because of it.
Yeah. That's more the consequences, that you become the poster child for how
Right,
not to use.
Exactly. That we're talking about you
ChatGPT.
a year and a half later.
Yeah. So before we go to our break, I've got another example, which is a little different example. It's in 2021. So 2021 is like smack in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And one of the great things about the COVID pandemic was it created a huge amount of opportunity for researchers, because here's this thing that's going on in real time, generating huge amounts of data in real time with real problems that needed to be solved in real time. And so, of course, all the AI and ML researchers are rushing or jumping over each other to generate models that can predict whether a patient has COVID or not. And early on, it was much more critical because people were going into the hospital not being able to breathe and having lung X-rays, chest X-rays, and CT scans, and trying to figure out does this person need to go on a ventilator? And if there's a limited number of ventilators, you also want to be able to make sure that if you're allocating resources to somebody, they really need it, as opposed to giving to somebody who doesn't really need it and leaving somebody who is at death's door sitting and waiting in the hallway for a ventilator. So there's some real criticality here. So in 2021, there's a study that was published that did a survey of AI and ML algorithms that had been developed to detect COVID from chest X-rays and chest CT scans. And I'm quoting from the article. Again, there's going to be a link for that. The conclusion was, quote, "None of the models identified are of potential clinical use due to the methodological flaws and or underlying biases." And I think it's important to kind of read this. There's this one paragraph, and I'm not a biology or medical researcher, but I know enough to be able to parse out what is the important part here. So it says, given recent developments in the application of machine learning models to medical imaging problems, there's fantastic promise for applying machine learning models to COVID-19 radiological imaging for improving the accuracy of diagnosis compared with the gold standard RT-PCR, that's the PCR test, while also providing invaluable insight for prognostication of patient outcomes. These models have the potential to exploit the large amount of multimodal data collected from patients and could, if successful, transform detection, diagnosis, and triage of patients with suspected COVID-19. Of greatest potential utility is a model that can not only distinguish patients with COVID-19 from patients without COVID-19, but also discern alternative types of pneumonia, such as those as bacterial or other viral etiologies. So here's the important part. With no standardization, AI algorithms for COVID-19 have been developed with a very broad range of applications, data collection procedures, and performance assessment metrics. Perhaps as a result, none are currently ready to be deployed clinically. Reasons for this include, 1, the bias in small data sets, 2, the variability of large internationally sourced data sets, 3, the poor integration of multi-stream data, particularly imaging data, 4, the difficulty of the task of prognostication, and 5, the necessity for clinicians and data analysts to work side by side to ensure that developed AI algorithms are clinically relevant and implementable into routine clinical care. Now, that's the paper reporting on this. But give me 1 second to see if I can conjure up my other link here.
Well, while you do that, let me just say that this is 2021, and I have a lot of respect for what's coming down the pipe. This is 2021. Everything that was just said there at the end, AI algorithms have been developed with a broad range of applications, the bias in small data sets, the variability of large international source data sets, the poor integration of multi-stream data. All of that is fixable and will be fixed. I mean, make no mistake about it. Again, it's great to see these cautionary tales because it puts the brakes on full, carefree, enthusiastic adoption of what is effectively a nascent technology. However, this is incredibly powerful stuff that is only going to get better, and there will be side-by-side work with clinicians to develop AI algorithms that are clinically
believable.
Exactly. Well, trustworthy.
Trustworthy. So I'm going to jump in real fast because you say they're fixable, but there's 5 things here. Now, by the way, the background here is, I read a couple other articles about this. The guys who analyzed some of this stuff, they found that the model that they had built was flawed because it was trained on a data set that included scans of patients that were lying down while scanned and patients that were standing up. The patients who were lying down were much more likely to be seriously ill, so the algorithm learned to identify COVID risk based on the position of the person in the scan. So here's a good example where the semantics of the data led into the integration of a bias that had nothing to do with the scan. It had to do with the position of the patient when the patient was being scanned. And all the reasons of these issues. Number 1, bias in small data sets. That's an information risk. 2, the variability of large internationally sourced data sets. That is an information risk. 3, poor integration of multi-stream data. That is an information risk. 4 is the difficulty of the task of prognostication. Well, that's prognostic. You can also be a fortune teller and do have difficulty in your prognostication. So I'm not going to attribute that to information risk. But number 5, the necessity for clinicians and data analysts to work side by side. Yet again, that is an information risk. So 4 out of the 5 items that were called out here are literally information risks, and they need to be addressed.
Before we jump to break, give me your opinion on this. So is this are these information? These are again. This is like any other. Yeah, we both have children, right? These are the mistakes that the learning curve, unearths. Is this something that that you see companies needing to avoid at all costs? I mean, how do you get better if you don't make these mistakes? I guess is my point. And how do you advise an organization to stay out of these weeds but still be able to learn about these biases? How do they learn about these biases without stepping into them? If you know what I mean. That's how children learn. That's how everything learns. Is there's this feedback loop, right?
Yeah, but I'm going to answer a different question because I don't want to answer that question right now. The question I'm going to answer is, which I'm going to pretend that you asked is this common in organizations to have all these issues? And my answer is, there is not a single client of mine or client organization.
The mistake
bias
making.
in small data sets, variability of source data sets, poor integration. There is not a single organization that I've ever dealt with that didn't have that rampant. Right. Every organization has small data sets that are, anytime
So how do you find out? How do you find out that you have
the first thing is you hire a data strategist like me to come in and help identify where these risks are.
Right.
So, commercial off. What you have to do is have a better understanding of what are the again, what we talk about vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities associated with particularly with developing or fine-tuning a generative AI or an LLM, a large language model, to do these types of things, is you have to start with an understanding of what are the expectations for the level of quality in the data that is being used to do the training and the fine-tuning. And that is something that everybody seems to be neglecting in their hysteria over the future of LLMs and generative AI, is they're forgetting that there is, 90%, 80% of the work, I'm not going to say 90%, 80% of the work to make these things do what they need to do is in making sure that the data is of a level of quality that is appropriate to ensure that you can have a level of trust in the output.
Well, and I think the other takeaway for me anyway is in both of these instances, it feels like there was time sensitivity and a bit of a rush, right? So in case of the COVID, obviously time was of the essence, and there was a lot of pressure to speed the process along. In the case of the attorney, I can imagine it was more just a time management issue where they just didn't put the research cycles against that particular case for whatever reason, and we could speculate on that for a long time. But we will take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to dig in on another example.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.
All right, David. We are back with another example. We just went through a case in the legal area. We went through a case with regard to medical and health concerns. Now we're going to get into a little real estate, and I believe it's one of my favorite companies on the planet, Zillow.
Yeah, I love the website. It's really interesting to go and look in neighborhoods and check out what their expected predicted costs or value of homes, and so I'm not immune to that. Every once in a while I go there. I go to all the other real estate companies that have these websites. But the story here is is that, let me tell a little bit about Zillow. Zillow, their main business was essentially as an information provider to be able to essentially channel interest in real property to forward that to realtors and be able to take some cut of the benefit. What do they call that? The
broker's fees.
The broker's fees, right? Yeah, I was drawing a blank there. So that was their main business. But at some point, they launched what they were calling a home sales operation that was using this internally developed pricing algorithm. Now, if you go to any of these sites, they will tell you what their estimate is of the price. Zestimate, right? So that's probably the algorithm, or at least that's probably an earlier version or a less powerful version of this algorithm they were using for this home sales operation.
Yeah, truth of the matter is this is time honored. Every real estate broker has been doing this manually for forever, right? Looking at the local other transactions that have happened and taking square footage and other little bits and pieces and kind of predicting out what they think the asking price should be.
Right. So their basic business was essentially what in the financial industry you'd call arbitrage, which is looking for where there is a gap between the price that the sellers are selling and the price that the buyers are willing to buy. You kind of sneak in there, you kind of navigate that gap, and you skim off some partition of what's in there. So if I can buy,
and this isn't just a Zillow thing. This is a big corporate game these days. There's hedge funds now in this game of arbitraging real estate based upon the skyrocketing values that have happened since the pandemic and all the flood of cash into the markets,
or even going back before the Great Recession, which we can target that as another interesting topic for a future conversation.
Yeah.
But anyway, their basic business was to identify undervalued homes, buy them and hold them as inventory, and then sell them at a profit. So Zillow is now not just brokering between people interested in buying homes and brokers and realtors who are representing sellers. They're actually buying homes and trying to sell them themselves. And so in November 2021, actually I think it was the 1st of November, they announced that they were closing this program, laying off 2,000 people and taking a $304 million third quarter write-down. So again, we've got some links to some articles. They're got a derailed algorithm, property valuations that reduce the estimated value of the houses purchased by more than $500 million. And an analyst had estimated that possibly 2/3 of the homes that Zillow purchased are currently valued at below what Zillow paid for them. And so, again, this is a question associated with the use of an artificial intelligence machine learning model.
As anybody who's bought a house or sold a house, and that's a fairly significant moment in your life. It's hard not to internalize the fluctuations in price because it's real money. And I think what this added up to for Zillow anyway, because they were doing it at such a massive scale, was a ridiculous amount of money.
Well, we're gonna double down on the amount of money in a minute. I just want to give a little more detail. I'm quoting from one of our articles in Zillow's third quarter conference call with investors and an appearance on CNBC. The president of the company the CEO made reference to the company's lack of confidence in its home buying algorithm's ability to accurately predict fluctuations in home prices. Even still, the company uses algorithms to buy 9,680 homes in the third quarter. All the AI and machine learning in the world isn't yet up to the task of the complexity of valuing a home in a rapidly changing market, and this move by Zillow is proof. He, the CEO, said that Zillow could have blamed the iBuying failure on black swan events, the pandemic, or unprecedented labor shortages, for example, and then tweak the models and press on. But the CEO, one of the tech industry's most respected and accomplished entrepreneurs, said that was too risky. And while the company eventually could have solved forecasting and operational problems with the algorithm, it's the algorithm itself where he placed the most uncertainty. Now, here's a quote. What we can't solve is what the model is going to tell us about how much capital we need to raise, deploy, and risk in the future in order to achieve a scale that we think is necessary to offer a fair price to customers for their homes in a competitive way. In other words, the algorithm used to predict home prices just didn't work to the level that Barton was going to risk the entire company on it. So fair, I give the guy a lot of credit. He looked at it and he said, this thing's not working the way it's supposed to work. We're going to pull the plug. But just as kind of an interesting data point, I live in a house. When we moved in, a couple of years after we moved in, we did some renovations so that we could give our kids, each of them, a bedroom. So I went to Zillow and I checked their estimate value of the house, which I will start out by saying I believe it's to be undervalued, but maybe that's a reaction of anybody who owns a house. But I look at the data that's associated with my house, and it says it's a studio, which completely doesn't make sense, with 3.5 baths and 2,200 square feet. And I went to some other websites. I went to Trulia. It has the same data. I went to Remax. They had a dash for the number of bedrooms, but they had 3,182 square feet. All these are based on the data that is provided by Maryland in their database of real property ownership, which is what's used for essentially is then provided back to the counties for doing evaluation of tax assessments. And so these are all based on the data that's in the state, which doesn't list the number of bedrooms and has us at 2,200 square feet or so, plus 900 square feet of a finished basement. Now, my house now we have 5 kids, and my wife and I share a bedroom. So we've got 6 bedrooms. So it's a 6-bedroom house. We did an expansion to add more space. So when we originally had it, there were 4 bedrooms. So we added 2 bedrooms and another bathroom. So basically our house has 4.5 bathrooms, 4.5 full, 4 full, 1/2 bathroom, 6 bedrooms. We added about 750 square feet. So we have about 3,000 square feet plus the 900 square foot finished basement. But that's not it. I mean, if they knew that, they would probably revise their estimate, because their estimate is essentially based on dollars per square foot.
And old data.
Yeah. So it's on, but there's other aspects of this, which is I happen to live in a neighborhood that is desirable to me and my family for certain reasons that are not captured in or accounted for in real estate databases. So, an example might be proximity to public transportation. Well, they can figure that out, or maybe desirability of the location just in terms of where people of particular, cluster allocations or segments like to buy their home, or proximity to services that are not typically monitored as part of a generic real estate evaluation protocol, such as, we send our kids to a religious school, and so do most of the other people who live in this neighborhood. And so that is a characteristic of the neighborhood that you're never going to see in a Zillow or Trulia or a Remax or a Realtor.com, because these are just characteristics that they don't even know about. And if you go to a place like Manhattan, New York City, there's micro neighborhoods that are literally half a block. And the difference between the desirability of apartments at the southern end of the block and the northern end of the block could be 20% difference in price. I mean, it's when you look at these micro neighborhoods, they would have to have a lot of data that is coming from lots and lots of sources. Well, what we just talked about before? There's bias in small data sets, there's variability of large source data sets, and there's poor integration of multi-stream data. These are all the aspects that were associated with the COVID-19 models, and there's no difference with these. There's the same issues. Now, the point I want to make here is not that, okay, Zillow, they got stung, and to the tune of $500 million. So that's fine. But the day that this got announced, which was November 1st, 2021, when the morning bell on the stock market, stock opened at $102 per share. At the end of the day, the stock closed at $66 per share. So there's a $36 decrease in the per share price. And there's, again, I'm estimating the number of outstanding shares. I went to a couple of websites to check this out. Rule of thumb, 250 million outstanding shares. So if you look at the cumulative loss of market capitalization of the company, it went from somewhere around 20 to 24 billion. No, 20 to 24 billion dollars to about 11 to 13 billion dollars, or basically if I multiply 36 times 250 million, I get $9 billion. So if you were counting on Zillow being part of your retirement fund, that just said you got to go work for a couple more years, because your pile of gold is now much less than it used to be, and that's orders of magnitude bigger of a financial impact.
That's the result of a fairly brave decision by the Zillow CEO, because he had to understand that was going to happen. I mean, just the sheer admission that, our algorithms have not worked out in our business model that we've been building against, a fairly aggressive business model that was really, truth of the matter is, it's a great idea. It's a perfectly, and actually, I was just looking, there's actually now a law, which is another information risk, or not a law. There's a current a federal act that's been introduced for debate in Congress, the Hedge Fund Control of American Homes Act, which was introduced in 2023, which is part of the information risk as well if you get into this sort of thing. But it is a tried and true model, to the point where now there are Congress people who believe there needs to be a law to prevent hedge funds from owning American homes at the amount that they do. And I think there's some, projection of almost 750 million homes owned by hedge funds, which doesn't sound like a good idea to me. But it's certainly the business that Zillow is trying to get in. But truth of the matter is that they reached a point where they, in order to make it work for their scale, they would have to borrow money and raise money in order to play at that level. And they've just ran out of ramp, because their algorithm, which I believe they probably thought was their secret weapon, didn't work.
It's the equivalent of a what do they call that when you buy options and
arbitrage?
No. It's like a call. It's like
the put.
No. That you've got to put up a certain amount of capital to cover your potential losses. So if I let's say I want to get stock in Solutions Review Incorporated, and the price is $100, and I think, the price is going to go down to $60 a share. I'm going to sell an option to
short it.
I'm going to short it, right? Or actually, no, that's what I'm talking about. Short sales. And if you do short sales, you got to be able to cover the potential loss. So I did a short sale, and yet all of a sudden the stocks, because of the great podcast that you're doing, the value of your shares go up to $120 per share. And so now the person who sold short, they got to cover that. And that's exactly what this is like. And it's interesting because the numbers almost don't make sense a little bit, because if they bought, maybe they're saying that they bought 10,000 homes that were undervalued. I mean, how much are you going to get on, let's say you buy a house for what, $500,000, and then you sell it for $580,000?
Yeah, no, I think there's more going on, because it was my understanding that they were actually doing, they were actually incorporating full renovations and home improvements, to the point where they were trying to effectively double things. I mean, they were. It was a much more sophisticated. It wasn't.
But even so, it was much more
sophisticated.
Let's say you're going to make $500,000. On how many homes did they buy? I mean, it said that they bought 10,000 that were, I'm estimating, they paid too much for. But how many homes total did they buy? I mean, even if they bought 10 times that, so 100,000 homes times $500,000 per home is what, $50 million? So,
well, I mean, David, look at what has happened to the real estate market since the pandemic. After the world kind of changed overnight, real estate prices, and there's a whole nother story that underlies this around how, basically the flood of money that went into the economy from the CARES Act and all the other pandemic acts has massively inflated the prices of real estate to the point, honestly.
Well, I hope not. I hope not, because we're finally above water on our house. So,
well, they've never been higher. I can tell you that, although I think they're starting to settle back down. But there was a massive inflation of. You could almost argue that Zillow got out too early. If the numbers,
it's interesting because I was lucky enough to actually take a class in macroeconomics where they were talking about supply and demand, and the instructor was a great guy, and he would talk about stuff like this, which was that because everybody was at home, there's a demand, everybody had to be at home, so there's a demand for homes, and so the price of homes went up and the price of apartments went up because the price of homes went up, and people who needed to be somewhere, they couldn't buy a home, so they would have to rent an apartment. So the demand for apartment rentals went up as well, higher than it normally would in relation to the cost of buying a house. So it was kind of a weird scenario, and that those kind of weird scenarios are the launching point for these black swan events. I mean, even today though, I expect that house prices would go down because interest rates have been creeping up. But that goes to yet another issue, which is when the price goes up, then the inventory goes down, and when the inventory goes down, or when interest rates go up, not a lot of people are buying because they can't afford it. And if the price has gone up and people aren't buying, then how can you base your models on comps when you don't have enough comp information to be able to have that feed into your model that tells you how much a house should be worth?
Well, and more to the point, with regard to your example, and I think with regard to everybody who has a massively low interest rate, rather than moving to a bigger house, they're just adding on to the existing house rather than taking on a different mortgage at a higher rate. They're just keeping the mortgage they have and taking out a home equity loan and just building bigger existing homes, which that data then begins to screw with the modeling because they can't keep pace with all the square footage changes where this data sits and how you incorporate that data into kind of the classic real estate data.
So and I think we're going to come up on a break, but we'll talk a little bit about that as part of a much bigger issue, I think, when we come back.
Yeah, great. We'll take a break now and we'll get into it.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, David, we're back, and what we were just talking about before the break, I think, is what we really want to dig into, and what brings us back to level set against information risk, and that is the data models. And when data starts to pour in from places that the data programming hasn't anticipated, like people expanding the square footage of their house through home equity loans, and where does that data become incorporated, and what is how many new bathrooms, and how many, what does a home improvement loan buy you in terms of your basement, and renovating that, and how does that get calculated in? So there's all kinds of implications now with regard to the risk of predictive modeling against incomplete data sets, and data sets that are constantly changing, and data that is existing in places that it wasn't existing in when you were originally developing the model.
So let's start with that, which is because there's so many different aspects of this, but let's start with the challenge of being able to do integration of data that is coming from a variety of sources, either without knowing what those sources are, or just treating them as what you as a data user thinks the data means, as opposed to what it really means. And so this first example, which is, and I'll use Maryland as the example, is that the data, and I've done other investigations when, for example, I look at some of the locations where I see large amounts of renovations being done on a home and looking to see what the tax rate is on those homes. Now, the tax rate is, all this stuff is public data, but it's public data in different sources. So I can go to the county and I can find out how much taxes have been paid on a particular address or parcel, but that data is not related to any data that's being stored at the state level. And I can go to the county, a different data set, which is the permitting data set, which has all the details of all the renovations that people have done to their homes. But that's not associated with the tax people, and it's not associated with the state. And I could probably conjure up some data from public data sets that are being released through, the mortgage, organizations, Freddie and Fannie, that have details about single family homes and mortgages. So I could see when there's loans that are being taken out or refinancing or home equity. There's probably a lot of data about that because all these organizations want to monetize their data. But the question is, two questions. Number one, if I don't even know that these data sets exist, then how could I possibly integrate them into the training sets for my models? So that's number one. And number two, even if I do know that they exist, there's somebody whose job it is to run an extract on some database and dump that out to some public site. They've got their biases in what they think is appropriate and what data they think is going to come out and what filtering they did on their extraction routine. And they provide a data set with close to no metadata that describes what each data element is. So even if the data were available and I knew about it, it's not really clear that the data that's there is something that I, as an independent data user without having any direct contact with the producer of that data, could necessarily interpret in a way that is 100% consistent with the way the data was collected and managed. So we've got all these potential gaps in governance that span multiple administrative domains, and create that scenario for issues with variability of externally sourced data sets. So that's one part of one piece of this problem, is that everybody's building their models, bringing as much data as they can get from wherever they can get it from. But who is sitting down and saying, what are my expectations for level of quality, and what are the variables I want to monitor for the quality of that data? And what if I see data that isn't meeting that level of expectation, and who do I contact, and how do I make a decision about whether I should or should not use this data to help build that model?
Well, and more to the point, when you're talking about public data sets like this, I mean, you're going to get wildly different levels of quality from county to county and town to town and state to state, let alone the fact that to them, this isn't necessarily a mission critical data gathering situation. Whereas if you're betting your company on the accuracy of the county's assessor's data, good luck.
Well, so
try to scale that.
That's exactly the point, which is I can go to the state's database of real property. First of all, what it reports, it doesn't even say how many bedrooms are in the house. So I'm not even sure where they're finding that data. But even so, why is it that when a homeowner establishes a contract and gets permitted to do an expansion on their house, and that goes through the county, why is the state not insist that the county provide that information back up to update the state's database? And the reason for that is they don't care. It's not because
this is
I'm not saying they
exactly
don't
the
care.
reason, because they're a nonprofit
Right,
organization.
right.
It's not driving any kind of significant revenue.
Right.
I mean, ironically, it should be, because
but they're Their business is not to be
as you know, if you've ever gotten your annual assessment, you know that there's a lot of loosey-goosey wiggle room in assessments.
Right. And if a guy who built a 7,000 square foot house on a lot that used to have a 1,500 square foot house is still being assessed at the rate of a 1,500 square foot house,
good for him.
Who's going to complain about that? I mean, right? I mean, who loses? The people that lose are the county and the state. And
right, but the county and the state, because they are ultimately elected by these homeowners, and the homeowners are the voters.
No, but it's
always been the case. It's always been the case, except where there's no sales tax in a state. The property assessments have been always pretty favorable toward the homeowner, and as a result, it's kind of an unwritten rule that we're not going to look that hard because our revenue comes from income tax and whatever. But in states like New Hampshire or Florida or wherever there is no income tax, it gets a little more aggressive. I would wager
that's possible. But what I will say is that it's to everybody's detriment if not everybody is paying the same assessed rate. So if I'm paying a taxes based on the size, an accurate view of the size of my house, and the guy up the street who's got enough money to build a 7,000 square foot house is paying a third of what I'm paying, then I'm subsidizing his garbage collection.
Yeah, no, they catch up on that stuff. I mean, it's not usually by street. It's county by county, though, for sure. I mean, some counties are better at it than others, but I think on the whole, whatever the elected body is, if it's a county-wide body or if it's a town-wide body or whatever, they're the ones that will ultimately drive the balance. But that balance is not level across, community organizations like county to county or.
Yeah, and I will admit we kind of wandered off track there for a minute.
Oh no, but it gets to the biases, and it gets to the fact that there is no clean way to keep. It would be lovely if data was pristine all the time, but I mean, let's face it. If you want to find the least pristine data, go to government. That's where it is, and the fact of the matter is they keep a lot of data and a lot of data that private corporations rely on, and this is where you end up with information risk.
Well, so I'll pivot, because let's go back to our lawyer and his reliance on this model that was making stuff up. The problem there is that the data that's being used to train the model is essentially giving the algorithm the ability to look at examples that are of text or examples of output that are related to a particular set of topics in some kind of knowledge graph or knowledge environment. And there's lots of different technical aspects of all these things, which I do not profess to be an expert on any part of it, but it's based on prediction. And it's not based on reality, which is saying, okay, well, here I'm going to go to my inventory or my database of all the different cases and do a search for the ones that match your question. It's saying, well, if I were to answer that question, what is the most likely stream of words that would give you an answer that meets what you're looking to get? And if you don't understand that, I'll say shame on you. But on the other hand, if what we want is for our technology sector to build AI models that are trustworthy, and then, let's start, eliding that into, we want them to build self-driving cars that don't, crash into elephants because there was no elephants in the training model that got in the middle of the road to allow the car to even know that there's such a thing as an elephant and that you can't drive straight through it, or the robots that are building our critical infrastructure for them to say, well, this is what the bridge looks like, but without realizing that it's completely clad reinforced steel, and it thinks that it can build it out of bricks that are made out of mud and straw, because that's what it looks like. So they build they have a design that says robots go collect a bunch of mud and a bunch of straw and make bricks.
Well, I mean, to kind of overlay the two examples now, right? So Zillow didn't exist 20 years ago. Now it exists. It only exists because some startup venture-funded folks decided that there was an opportunity, a very profitable opportunity, to aggregate the data that existed in all of the real estate databases into this massive data set of every home in the United States. And I don't know where else they're at, but that's worked out really well. Zillow has would be considered a incredibly successful startup by doing just that. And they certainly didn't get it right in the example that we used, they're getting it right for the most part. People like Zillow, people use Zillow. Zillow's making a lot of money. And while they didn't necessarily figure out how to arbitrage home ownership, they're still a going concern. Somebody is going to come along and create the Zillow for case law. There's no question in my mind that that's already being sorted out. And while any lawyer who decided a year ago to rely on, what currently exists in an LLM for, their case submissions, they deserve whatever they got from that. But make no mistake about it, that same lawyer will be getting a call from a salesperson in a year or two that says, we have got the Zillow of case law, that now we've looked at everything. We've sorted it all out. It's an LLM purely for legal information. And we now guarantee, and you can test and you will find out, it's nearly flawless, and it's better than any human, and it's better than any of your paralegals can possibly do, because it's consumed every bit of case law available, and it now can, through massive amounts of training from our legal teams and our legal, consultants, it now is almost flawless with regard to being able to support case law.
So if I were that lawyer, I would say, if I were that lawyer, I would be a lawyer who's got 25 years worth of experience in doing data quality. So that would make me different from, 99.9% of the lawyers. But if I were that lawyer, I would say, okay, well, for me to trust that what you're saying is true, you would need to demonstrate to me that all the data that you've used to train that model meets a particular set of data quality requirements that are documented and are auditable, so that I can look at that and say, yeah, I agree that the data came from sources that were trustworthy. I agree that there's no inherent bias in the data that you're using, et cetera, to be able to say, I'll trust it. And I happen to know that in order for you to build a model, the data's got to be good, because if you use flawed data,
they're going to say, how much is the subscription? That's what they're going to say. They're going to say, how much is it? Because in the end, it's like, sure, because it'll be so low, because it'll be software as a service. It'll be incredibly compelling. It will be, and to your point, they will have incorporated all of the missteps that have been taken, and they will understand all the objections that are coming, and they will handle them all. And it will be, there's just too much money in it. There's just too much money in it.
The question is there enough investment money to be able to make it so that you can actually come out the other side and say, yeah, you can trust this. And so I'm going to encourage anybody who is interested in using large language models or using generative AI or using any kind of AI ML technology to bet their business, that they really need to allocate resources to understanding the quality of the data and ensuring that quality is at a level that will generate trusted output. And that is something that I think is being ignored, but that, if anything is a risk, that's going to be a huge one.
Well, and I think to your point that there will have to be a reckoning at some point by getting these things wrong. There has to be a reckoning. We talked last week about, the data breaches that are happening and the lack of, it's almost like a cost of business, of doing business, that you'll just pay whatever fines that come down the pipe for leveraging all this data and recklessly managing it and allowing it to go out the door periodically, because in the end, the cost of doing business by paying the fines is acceptable to them. So there has to be a reckoning at some point. And I think to your point, it's got to be people that are going to be, that are going to have to hold these things accountable. And there's going to have to be, at some point, not just blind trust, but some sort of auditing and some sort of compliance, and perhaps some sort of government overlaid action,
or some kind of certification that says we've got somebody who has come in, an external expert has come in and done an assessment of the quality of the data that we're using, and has interviewed us to understand what the sources need to do or need to have in order for our model to be believable. And here's the audit report that demonstrates that we've done our due diligence to make sure that our model can be trusted.
Yeah, and if you need anybody to do that for you, David Loshin is the man. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up, David. Another Information Risk podcast in the books. Thanks very much for the time today. Go Terrapins. Enjoy all that's coming to you as you graduate into this crazy new world of AI and data. And if you ever get in trouble out there as a Maryland grad, I know David's phone always rings, no matter any time, night or day. So thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.